So when you think about the 2008 financial crisis, the story we all know is about the failure of, deregulated markets.
Exactly, that the government had to reluctantly step in and save capitalism from itself.
It sounds like a rejection of the whole system, doesn't it?
It does, but that's what's so misleading. The reality is, well, it's actually much more shocking. The state intervention wasn't some rejection of neoliberalism.
Oh, is it then?
It was a raw demonstration that, in a crisis, we live in an age of big government executive action, no matter what ideology we pretend to have.
And that's our mission for this deep dive, to unpack that political earthquake, not just the economic tremors. We're pulling 3 major insights from Adam Tooze's fantastic 2018 book, Crashed.
Tooze argues the crisis didn't just expose broken markets, it exposed the very nature of the modern state.
So what's the first big idea?
The first is that the crisis it completely debunked the notion of limited governance.
The old laissez-faire idea.
The laissez-faire idea, exactly. The whole hands-off government, markets regulate themselves thing that had been dominant since the 70s. But when the system froze, the central banks, the US Fed, the ECB, they had to mobilize.
And mobilize is the right word. Tooze describes it as having more in common with military operations than with law-bound governance.
Yes, it was discretionary, massive state action, all to protect what they called systemic interests. It proved that the foundations of our financial system are, at their core, irreducibly political.
So much for limited government.
That idea just vaporized the moment the banks needed trillions.
Which brings us to the second point, which is about geography. For years, the story was all U.S.-China. Ben Bernanke's global savings glut.
That phrase was everywhere. The idea that all this cash from Asia was flooding into the U.S. and fueling the bubble.
But Tooze argues the real center of instability was actually the transatlantic relationship.
The Euro-American axis. That was the core linkage. European banks' claims on the U.S. market were the single biggest connection in the entire global system.
They were acting like a kind of global hedge fund.
A perfect description.
Yep.
London, Frankfurt, Paris. They were borrowing massive amounts of short-term cash and lending it long-term right into the American housing market.
And the leverage was just insane. We're talking about giants like Deutsche Bank, UBS, Barclays. They were leveraged over 40 to 1.
40 to 1. For every dollar of their own capital, they were juggling $40 of debt. Compare that to the American banks, which were closer to 20 to 1.
So when U.S. subprime mortgages started to fail,
the Europeans were the ones who were most exposed. They became the central systemic risk.
And that extreme exposure, it sets up the third big insight, which is about how global power dynamics were sort of inverted.
Temporarily, yes. The crash itself was a huge blow to America's credibility. A stark historical denouement, as Tooze puts it. And it was compounded by, frankly, political mockery, like the whole Sarah Palin affair.
But the real inversion came a bit later, didn't it?
It crystallized around 2010. The crisis had circled back and ignited the Eurozone debt crisis. Greece was on the verge of collapse.
And suddenly the roles are reversed.
Completely.
Yeah.
You have the U.S., under Obama, having to basically mobilize the IMF to go rescue 21st century Europe. Washington was literally pleading with German conservatives in Berlin and Frankfurt.
Begging them to stabilize their own banking system.
Yes. Desperate to stop Greece from becoming another Lehman. The world's superpower had to beg its allies to fix a mess that started with their own bank's reckless leverage.
So to recap, the crisis was really a political exposure. It revealed this deeply centralized transatlantic risk structure and, for a moment, totally upended U.S. geopolitical authority.
And it unveiled these systemic problems that, are still with us. Which brings us to a final, really unsettling thought for you to take away.
Go on.
It's from Larry Summers. His thesis is that American economic growth before 2008 was actually only average.
Wait, average, even with the biggest housing bubble in history?
Despite the housing bubble.
Right.
And that's the truly disturbing question.
Think about that. If even a great bubble wasn't enough to produce any excess in aggregate demand, what does that say about the underlying health of the economy?
It raises the possibility that the U.S. economy was already fundamentally weak, just masking decades of what economists call secular stagnation. A problem we may still be living with today. It's a deep dive for you to consider.